Perfect. So today we have a very awesome guest joining us from all the way from California. And Christy, welcome to the show.
Hi, Angel. Nice to see you again. And it's great to be here. Thanks, everyone, for coming into this video chat.
Awesome. Thank you for coming. How do you feel?
Pretty good. Right now, it's about 7 p.m. Friday night in California over here. So no fires anymore around my area. So I'm pretty happy. Not so much smoke anymore. How are things over there in Tokyo?
It's cool. We are in fall at the moment. So things are cooling off a little bit. It's rainy, kind of gray, but no worries. Still beautiful as always.
Awesome.
All right. So why don't we start with can you please introduce yourself? Who are you?
Sure. Yeah. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Christy Ishii, and I'm coming in from Monterey, Salinas, California, if you've ever been to this area before. I had recently been living in Tokyo, living in Japan for a total of 4 years, and I moved back home to California in June 2020. So amidst nobody flying at the airports, it was a pretty empty flight home. And I am currently in the startup phase of my own web design business and coaching career. And I focus on independent consultants, small businesses, as far as web design goes, and people for coaching, people who are in life transitions, career changes, quarter life crisis sometimes, and just people who want to discover a new path or career and life mission. So that's what I am up to currently.
Sounds beautiful. I want to know what makes your brand unique. Like what makes what you do unique from other brands?
I would say the most genuine part of what I do is it comes from the fact that every person that I get to meet starts a different conversation. So what makes it unique is kind of part of what goes on inside the conversation, but a lot of who I'm working with. And so the people in the client base are anywhere from their young 20s up to late 30s, and people across the board. It's not industry specific. So the uniqueness kind of just naturally happens because you never know where the conversation's going to go, where it's going to end up. And you learn so much in the process, especially when you're working between industries, and it fosters a really good kind of environment for a unique conversation.
Beautiful. I love it. So why don't we do the ice break we had?
Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to share the screen with you all. And if you've ever used the annotate button before, you'll know what to do. But I want to see where everybody is coming in from. So if you click on the black bar, it says mute, stop video, participants, and a couple squares down, you'll see the word annotate. So click on that, and then click on stamp. It's like the 5th button down. You can choose whatever stamp you want, but go ahead and click on the map, drop a stamp where you are currently located. So I am currently on the Central Coast, California, and just want to see where everyone's calling in. I know Tokyo is a bit small, so I see a question mark there. Yeah, that looks like Tokyo. Oh, there's somebody else from California. Very cool. Awesome.
Sorry, could you explain the annotate part again?
Yeah, it's in the the little bar that shows up. It's the it says you are sharing screen bar. Along that line, you'll see something called annotate with a pencil. Do you see that one?
Yes, I found it.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay, so it looks like pretty spot on. Oh, someone from SoCal. That's cool. And somebody not in Japan or the US. Where are you calling in from? I wonder. Maybe you can type in the chat, or you can let us know.
If you're not in America or in Japan, please type on the chat where you're from.
Oh, wow. Somebody is that Niigata? Awesome.
Looks like it.
Yeah, wow. So this is a pretty good group of people, and this pretty much reflects, you know, the networks that I work in. So the West Coast and largely Tokyo, but also other parts of Japan. So thanks everyone for trying that out. And Hal, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Sounds good. Did you stop sharing the screen?
Oh, I did. Somebody.
I think I still see your screen though.
I think somebody else. I'm viewing somebody else's screen right now.
Yeah, that ain't me.
That is not me either.
Yeah, I
Okay.
thought, no worries. That was funny. So, Christy, I wanted to ask you, we usually have foreign entrepreneurs here in Japan, and they tell us about their story. They're usually Western foreigners. I mean, of course, you are American, but you are 5th generation Japanese American?
Yes. So that means like my great-great-grandparents on my dad's side are originally from Japan a long time ago, like pre-World War II. And then mom's side is 4th generation. So.
Right. So that's amazing. That's something I've never heard someone with that experience before. So can you please tell us, how was your experience in Japan?
Sure. Some people might have heard this experience before. Kind of anybody who comes into Japan, maybe with Asian roots, anyone who blends in phenotypically in Japan tends to get quite a few expectations placed on them. So when I first came into Japan, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, like really excited for the JET program, I joined the program in Gunma-ken, so pretty rural area. Didn't know anything about it except a stock photo that I saw, and it happened to be a different prefecture, so I was really in for something new. And I was going through a lot of different, I think, points, transition points in my life. One, it was post-grad, so experiencing that post-grad life in Japan. Two, starting my first full-time job, which was also partly like a cultural ambassador role in the JET program. And then three, just trying to adapt to the culture and language without any kind of extra sign about me telling people that I'm from America. It's really confusing to a lot of people when they see somebody like me. So it was difficult at times. The first half of the year was very difficult, but once you start to get a hold of the language, a little bit of that barrier starts to rub off, which I was very grateful for that. And after Gunma, I jumped into Tokyo as a recruiter at an agency, and that was kind of when things took off, and I was really able to get a good idea of who's in the community, start to build, start to host larger events, and kind of serve a missing link, if you will, that I felt needed some love in Tokyo. So yeah.
Before I ask you the next question, guys, remember that for us, engagement is very important. So if you have a question for Christy or you want to jump in the conversation at any time, that's okay. For us, engagement is number one. If you have a question for Christy, you can either type it on the chat and then I'll pass the mic to you, or you can just talk. It's all good. We don't care here. All right, Christy. So we know that Japan is all about expectations, right? And I would love to know, what were those expectations to you as an American who looks Japanese? Like what was, because I feel like a lot of the times for Western looking foreigners, like a lot of the times if we make a mistake in Japanese or if we do something that's not proper here, they'd be like, oh, gaijin kara shoganai, ikara ikara. But I feel like a lot of the times the Asian foreigners have a harder time with those expectations. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. I think my experience and everyone else's experiences are different depending on your language acquisition and like the location where you are, because certain communities really do take in all people, and sometimes there are some barriers to break through. But the biggest, I think, challenge for me was breaking through and learning how to be myself in Japan and being okay with that. When you go into Japan, a lot of people, I think, sometimes put expectations on themselves to learn the language since they're living there, learn how to write, learn how to, converse with the people nearby, the local ramen shop, or with the students that you're working with. And there's a lot of pressure on that end. But when you go around Japan and people assume that you already know the cultural values and even things related to the bangumis and stuff, like knowing the actors and the geinojin, and when you don't have the cultural context, even learning the language does become quite a mystery for a lot of people. So I think it's definitely been an uphill battle, and then it kind of plateaued. And where it plateaued was in Tokyo. In Gunma, it was always trying to join a group, like a community. I joined the men's baseball team in Gunma, and that totally changed my the atmosphere and my experience living there, because I felt like part of the community. I was able to practice my Japanese outside of work and go to their like bonankais or nomikais and just really kick back with the guys and just be a regular kind of local in a way. Of course, there was still some barriers, but that was really important. But then going to Tokyo, an interesting thing happens where there's a lot more people that speak English. And so I think continuing that language journey becomes a choice. You kind of get to choose, do I keep going down, the pathway of perfecting my Japanese, perfecting my keigo, and, internalizing like the Japanese person in you? Or do you kind of take the path where you use your dominant language and find an industry that works for you, that also helps the people around you while respecting the culture? So I think that's kind of where I'm at in my journey with Japan, and kind of fitting in the expectations that people place on you as somebody who's not of and from Japan culturally. I think that's pretty much how I feel about it. Yeah.
Right. I mean, you talk a lot about identity, and I would love to know, how can you find your own self-identity when you live in a place that's so collective?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of people, when you go to Japan, you have to kind of reinvent yourself in a way. The labels maybe that you use to identify yourself don't necessarily match the lingo and the cultural space of Japan. So when I came to Japan, for example, I used to call myself like a Japanese American. And if I said Japanese American, people would get very confused and be like, hafu desu ka? And I'd be like, no, I'm a fourth generation, fifth generation. Kouta desu yo ne. And I was like, okay, I'll be whatever you want me to be, because it's definitely difficult to explain the context of that. But finding and building and discovering who you are in a place that really if you're new to Japan, it can be kind of a blessing in disguise, because you don't have any reputation. Nobody knows who you are. You're starting from zero. So that in itself is amazing, because you get to create the narrative for yourself. from ground zero, which means if you do something wrong or something that you don't align with, you got to find a way to reel that back in and you know, drive the path you want to. On the flip side, though, it is very confusing, and you can get mixed up between if it's something that, you know, is your identity, or if you're starting to blend in a little bit more with like the Japanese, more common communal, I guess, identity, if you will. Thinking of us as a group rather than an individual, that tends to, I think, blend in with a lot of people's mindsets the longer you stay in Japan, and you start to recognize your American-ness, per se, if you're from America, and your Japanese-ness kind of like brushing up against each other. And so that's a really big breaking point, and that's when your true, I think, inner self really starts to show. A lot of people kind of you know, live with the pressures of living in Japanese society, like not talking on the trains, like not taking a phone call on the trains, just totally walking in your path, not bumping into people on the sidewalks. And after living there for 4 years, I kind of just got used to it. But when I came back to America for the first time permanently, knowing I'm not going to go back to Japan, this really interesting veil just like lifted off of me. I didn't have to worry about what other people would feel like if I was talking out loud in a public space. I didn't have to worry about what I was wearing as a I don't know, as a girl, or just in general. I didn't have to cover up things. I just felt like a really strong sense of freedom of expression, which is interesting because I didn't feel like I didn't have that entirely. I didn't feel like I was suppressed that much when I was in Tokyo, but I don't know. When you kind of go in and out of these places, you start to see different different sides of yourselves kind of come out. So, yeah, it's definitely, there are good and bad things to go into a place where you don't really have a reputation, but it's up to you to kind of push yourself along and discover that. Yeah.
Perfect. We actually have a question from one of our members. Sima, go ahead.
Thanks for joining us, Kirsty. So I want to know, having moved back to the USA, do you still feel like your Japan journey has plateaued, or is it like a new discovery of Japan from the outside?
That's a great question. The latter is how I feel, actually. Rather than feeling like I kind of left Japan and it's in another dimension, I actually, due to what technology has given us, and due to the situation that in California specifically, it's really still heavily, we're still heavily influenced by the coronavirus. Like, we just barely were able to go to hair salons, at least in my county. Still, we cannot dine in at places. Having so much restriction on our social lives has pushed a lot of people towards the virtual scene. And I didn't think I would still have a connection to Japan, but with this virtual kind of community now, it's actually a lot easier than I had imagined to still do work, to do community events, and to host virtual kind of international programs now that I'm based out of California, but still connected with people in Tokyo. So I think I'm really fortunate that I was able to meet so many good people who still want to do things even though I'm not physically in Japan. So that's just a testament to that community. Like, the international community in Japan is really great. But I really do feel like it's kind of opened up into a whole new opportunity now that I'm out here. So thanks for your question. That was awesome.
All right, awesome question. How do you keep that balance between your American-ness and your Japanese side? Because I feel like with all the foreigners that I've met in Japan, there's a spectrum. So either they're very Western or they become very Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
So either they have like big gestures or loud, you know, like they do their thing, or they're very like And it's like, whoa. So how do you find that balance between, like sticking to your roots, but at the same time adapting to the local culture?
Wow, yeah, that's a deep question there. I think that's a continuous struggle. Depending on where you're going, what circles you're in at the time. I think the like Japanese switch and then the American switch kind of like turns on and off, depending on who's in the room and what language is spoken. But I do feel that both of them, being able to enter both worlds kind of is like the sweet spot. And kind of tying into the whole theme of this talk, like how to synergize your identity. This is really kind of the thing I'm most passionate about, working with people in Japan and outside of Japan. Like you said, people sometimes can grow their business better when they're speaking in English, and they're very assertive, they get things done a certain way, and it just works for them, and that's fine. And then there are some people that have completely internalized the Japanese culture, are super fluent, like idiomatic in Japanese, and that's a really impressive route as well. And I think certain countries, in fact, I've spoken to quite a few people from the publishing industry in the UK, and actually some people have told me that the way of communicating in the UK is kind of roundabout in a similar way like in Japan. Like you never really are super direct, whereas in America, of course, everything is always the opposite. And I think tuning into who you are, not necessarily based off nationality, but like your personality, that can really, I think, help people recognize if you're going to choose which one you want to identify with more. If you want to be more Japanese and very polite and just kind of don't mess up the status quo type of vibe, like that works really well for people. And so I hope people who feel that way are thriving in that field. But for some people like myself, I don't think I could spend a whole lot of time being very Japanese and doing everything the Japanese way. I definitely need something in my life, at least half of it, where I can be super free to express myself and be loud with my friends when they come to Japan, or just be unapologetically my authentic self. And I found that I couldn't always do that in Japan, so I had to make and carve out my own spaces where I could do that comfortably, and also other people around me felt they had the permission to just be themselves in Japan, without worrying about offending people in the country. So
Definitely. So you were talking about the switch, right? How we sometimes, when we meet our American friends or our international circle, we become more westernized, but then when we meet our Japanese circle, we become more Japanese. Is there a way to, instead of having a switch, to integrate both of those identities?
Yeah, I think people who can do that, to kind of blend both the cultures and both of the languages, really get to experience a different side of Japan. There are a lot of bilingual, bi-native people that have grown up both in Japan and outside of Japan. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily bi-native, but I know a lot of people who are, and it's very rewarding to be able to tap into both communities in Japan. And I think it's possible, but I do think the big difference between people who can actively enter both spaces is the language. So if people want to have that synergy and fully integrate into Japan while being their authentic self, I'd say maybe 70% of the time, language is very important, acquisition of Japanese. But if you're not at a super strong level, finding a group in Japan of people of all kinds of backgrounds, but English speaking people, They can be Japanese English speakers, or Japanese people who speak English, yeah. And that could be a really good place to build a community as well. So I wouldn't say it's limited based off your acquisition of language, but it definitely opens up so many doors if you can speak the language, understand how people feel, and kind of put in your own 2 cents while you're doing it. And that's a really good way to kind of synergize both cultures.
Definitely. Have you heard of shadow integration?
No, can you share more?
Yeah. So Carl Jung, he was a Swiss psychologist, right? And he talked about shadow integration. So shadow integration is basically, a lot of the times we human beings, we pushed away our dark side, right? Like, oh, this is bad, I can't think about that. Or this is wrong. So you push it into your subconscious. But Carl Jung used to say that in order to become a more complete person, you have to integrate that darkness. Like, you cannot be all light and you cannot be all dark. So you gotta integrate that shadow. So this is from my personal experience. And I believe the best way to adapt to any country, because I've been an immigrant twice, in America and in Japan. And the best way is, in my opinion, is to integrate those two identities. So like, instead of having a switch, when you're like, yo man, what's up? Ah, hi, kashikomarimashita. It's more like you blend in both and you are funny, but at the same time polite.
Yeah.
You're assertive, but at the same time empathetic.
That's the golden that's the golden sweet spot right there. I mean, and
Right.
I think that a lot of people who are successful in Japan are able to achieve that. And it takes a lot of emotional kind of depth, though, I think, to really empathize with people in Japan while still being, assertive and doing what you think is right. So blending the thought processes and kind of understanding where people are coming from, especially. I think living in different parts of Japan too can kind of, I would say, broaden the perspective that you have of Japan and Japanese people. Because a lot of times, wherever you start out in Japan, that's kind of like sets your mold for like what Japan is, what Japan people think, or Japanese people think, and it just creates all these stereotypes. And then you move somewhere else, you're like, oh wow, actually these people are way different. And just recognizing that, like anywhere else in the world, no two people are alike, and we cannot, assume that everybody is thinking the same way all the time. And I don't know, just finding the differences and bringing the best of both worlds together, I think creates a really good synergy that is good for life, but also for business and so on. So yeah.
Beautiful. I love that. So let's say we finish this event and I follow your advice. I find my identity and I do like everything you tell me. Okay, I know myself and I can adapt to Japanese culture. How do I translate that into a personal brand? Because one thing is knowing yourself, but the other one is to translate it into a business. How do you do that?
I think knowing who you are and how people see you in that space is really important. And kind of reconciling with both of those. So a lot of people might have this idea like, I'm this person, this is how I want to be seen. But with a different cultural lens and with a different language, you might be seen completely differently. And so I think being able to look at yourself from like a outsider perspective can really help people key in on what it is that you bring to the table, whether it's professional services like consulting, career coaching. A lot of people do the intercultural communications business model, right? They say, I'm American, but I speak Japanese, and so I can be your your linchpin to success. Like I can do both. I can turn to you, get what you want, and relay that in a nice way. And that's a really interesting thing that I see the most actually in Japan, that people capitalize on those soft skills and some business acumen, but a lot of people seriously recognize the gap between the States and Japan, and they know how people react to their services. But I think your personal brand, of course, another way to say that is your reputation. So if you are not jiving with the people in the area that you're working in, your personal brand and your reputation is not gonna probably live up to a good business model. Your brand is who you are a lot of times when you're an independent consultant. And so making sure that you're honest and have a lot of transparency when you're working with people, don't say you're someone and then turn around and be someone else, especially when you're working with different cultures and languages. Sometimes it's easy to be two completely different people or have a lot of different faces. So I think authenticity and who you are and showing up for people, no matter what business it is, I think is really important to preserving your personal brand and your reputation. Yeah.
Beautiful. Let's say I grab my phone, I scan your QR code, like the one you have over there, and we book a session. And I'm like, all right, Christy, I have a creative agency, and I want you to help me with a website, but I don't know about my brand. I need you to help me translate like my personality or like my beliefs, my identity into an actual intangible brand. How would you do that?
So it would start with a discovery call. They're usually 30 minutes to an hour, but an hour really gets all of the kind of details out. And essentially it's a lot of like self-faced questions. So internal questions that I kind of lay out on the table. So in a general website brief, you will be asked this, like the questions of like, who's your audience? What are the keywords you want to have on your website to attract the right type of people? There is, what is the service that you provide? What kind of terms are surrounding that in the different countries? Because sometimes it's different in certain places. But at the very core of everything, it's what is your mission, and being able to verbalize that and then allow me to kind of like chew on it, kind of like throw some words and phrases back at you, and you kind of validate whether or not that is how you're speaking and that's what you're feeling. And going from the mission and branching out each the services, the color palette, the logos and everything, it all has to be aligned with what your mission is. And that doesn't mean like an industry specific thing. It's like across industries, you can have a mission that intersects with, per se, okay, website building and career coaching. Like maybe people see those as two separate entities, but my mission is to connect people who are in the US and Japan who are bilingual or trying to become bilingual, and those are the clients that I work with. So the mission, is essentially the same, just different businesses now.
I love that. That was a perfect answer. And so let's say I talk to you, we have a discovery session, we make the brand, the color palettes, the logo and everything. I see with Corona, a lot of people started their own business, right? And their mission is beautiful. Like their logo and everything cool. But I feel like they all look the same. And if you guys go to our NIGHTCRAWLERS website, www.nightcrawlers.jp, and you scroll down, one of our like slogans is fuck vanilla. And what I mean by fuck vanilla is that I feel like a lot of people are doing their businesses and trying their thing, and I'm so happy for that. Like, that's amazing. But all the brands look alike. Like, they have like stock photos like, with like a white background, or like it's so whack. Like, Christy, how do we stop that?
Yeah, no, I love how that's kind of been the mission that you've been sharing, you know, as we're building out these topics, and also even just the backdrops, you know, it's all colorful and just speaks like uniqueness in a way. I think a lot of times people, when they start their own business, they just, you know, market research is really important. You have to know, you know, where the demand is, what people are interested in, what's kind of trending, or not trending, but what is in high demand. And right now with Corona, online and digital presence is one of the most tapped into marketplaces right now. Anything from SEO, content marketing, just having a website, and it's just any type of website is so important for people, especially in e-commerce, even in the food industry. And everybody kind of tries to just whip it together and looks at the market and like pulls from that, rather than building it out from internally. And I think that's what you would get when working with somebody like me, who really focuses on what your mission is, and how to build out from yourself into the market. Because of course anyone can look at a website and, you know, copy the layout. There's Wix, Squarespace, WordPress, right? All of those have the same layouts. You can notice it too when you go to people's websites and you've seen kind of, oh, this person looks exactly like, this website looks exactly like that one, just like a tint shade difference. And I think, you know, it does kind of, like you said, it's too vanilla, right? It's just, it doesn't reach out to people and speak out in a way that you would maybe if you met someone in person. And so I think the other like focus point when you're building out your brand, especially digitally, is how, like, think about how you impact people when you meet them in person. Nowadays you're reaching out through the internet. You wouldn't show up, you know, dressed in well, some people might show up dressed in a suit and, you know, try to be as professional as possible, like be a super, you know, Japanese salaryman or woman or something like that. But it's a really unique time where you don't have to fit a mold. In fact, being your authentic self in a way can drive more revenue and actually be better for your business than kind of copying what all of these people have done in the past.
Gotcha.
I see a question.
Yeah, we have a question from Herb. Herb,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Is on. My mic on? Sorry. Can you hear me? Yeah, sorry, I messed up my question here. I should have checked it before I sent it out. To follow what Angel just said about all the sites looking the same, do you use like standard templates when you're designing a site? Or maybe are you aware of any sort of a cultural specific type backgrounds that you would use in your sites to like highlight your brand? I don't know if that makes sense. I'm not sure what exactly business you're in, and are you in the front end, the back end, when you do the sites, or?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good question. So I work specifically on the front end of website development. Nowadays, we're really fortunate to be in a stage of life where you can literally go online and build your own website without knowing how to code. Wix.com, Squarespace are the probably simplest website builders to access. They have two types of, well, Wix has two types of editing platforms. There's one that's called like ADI, Wix ADI, and you can go in, you can pick a template, and it'll kind of adjust the column widths and the gaps for you. And there's a little bit less customizability, but those tend to be the websites that fall under kind of the vanilla maybe label, if you will, because there's not a lot of customizability. But you know, if you click the button that says Wix Editor, you then get to go into this whole new kind of editor platform that you have full range editing possibilities at your fingertips. And that's the part that gets a little bit tricky. You have to know where the edges line up. You have to like look at the mobile preview of it too, and that takes a lot of time for some people. So going back to your question, like what do you recommend people use? I think if you can, you should definitely try to give customizing a template a shot. So you can choose a template, but then you start in the template mode and go to the more in-depth editor side if you are comfortable learning new things and trying, you know, different sizes and color palettes and having that full customization. Or you can hire somebody to do this work for you, which is why this industry is growing so much, because some people might be able to do it in maybe a couple days in a week, and it could take the same, like the person, their client, it could take them like a month to figure out all the ins and outs and get the same results, if you will. So kind of, you know, templates are great. There's so many now. I think WordPress has the most templates. They also have different editors, web editing systems inside. So Builder Beaver, I think that's what it's called, is one of them. There are so many different ones, but I don't use those, to be honest, because it just it kind of complicates things, and most people will just choose one editor within WordPress to work with if they're building out websites. They don't kind of like, there are hundreds, like if not thousands of different editor sites within WordPress. A new one that I did find out about recently, if you are a little bit more interested in clean templates, not so much boxy, but like the ones that you see for startups these days, like Fastly, or I don't know, anything that's started within the past 5 years. A lot of people use Webflow. Webflow it looks like WordPress, but it's a lot more fun, I would say. Like you have a lot of customization, and it's really pretty, the way it comes out, and you don't have all these plugins that you have to put in like you do for WordPress, and it just takes a little bit more time to learn. And they have free courses though that pop up as you're going through the website builder, so you can actually learn as you go. So check out that website too if you're interested in having a unique template, but also, you know, giving yourself enough time to still work on your business while also creating a new website. Another question.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Herb. We have a question from Miguel. Miguel.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Christy. Thanks for this.
Hi.
So my question's on, like, do you feel like you have to kind of stick to one consistent aesthetic because, or do you feel like in order to balance like SEO, you might want to run like 2 different versions of the website, for example? So like an example would be, audience A likes like a layout or something that's more like a single page, and audience B might like a lot of content like in one screen, that sort of thing. Do you feel like that's necessary? Yeah. Yes.
Okay, thanks for your question. I think it definitely is important to know your audience. So if you know them that well, that you know that you should have different types of websites targeted at different people, I think that's very good to be aware of that. And you can have 2 websites. I would say the only reason though why you would have different SEO strategies would be because you're working in different countries. Japan and the US have very different like keywords that are flying off the charts. They have different search engine like processes. Like people search things differently in Japan than they do in the States. So if you are having kind of like an international presence for your digital brand, it could be a good idea. If you know somebody with the expertise in both of the countries, then that would be probably the best of both worlds. But I almost would encourage people to not split up their websites to be two completely different things. Reason being because there are so many people working on their own small businesses, consultancies, professional services websites, and you cannot service everyone, for lack of better words. Like, you cannot solve everyone's problems. So finding a niche is kind of what most, if you like type in how to start a like online business, a lot of people say find your niche. Like, that's the first thing you got to do. And the reason why that plays into your SEO and your websites is if you have too many different groups that you're trying to target, it's going to be very hard for you to kind of like get off the ground unless you already have that following. So if you already have thousands of followers, like a lot of people, I guess influencers, if you will, if they want to start a business, they will have the community, the depth, and maybe be able to channel like different businesses. But if you're just starting out, breaking into a new market, I almost would say focus on the one that you're strongest in with your largest network, and then piggyback off of that website, and then kind of like branch out into your second business model, so that you do have like a flow of like traffic. That would be my suggestion for that.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question. Mm-hmm.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Miguel. So, Christy, one of our topics in the event page is the benefits of having a personal board of directors. So we talked about knowing ourselves and then transmuting that into a brand. And then we're talking about having other people helping us. Can you please tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So personal board of directors, that phrase is something I learned from Kathy Matsui, who I'm sure you know who she is. Kathy Matsui is one of the most well-known economists or economy strategists and strategists in Japan. She kind of like was the right-wing woman for Abe and his womenomics strategies and arrows and whatnot. And she brought up this topic at the Women in Business Summit in 2018, hosted by ACCJ. And basically, personal board of directors, if you type it in online, there are a few people that have written about it, but it's structuring your own support system, essentially. And it's like outside of your own company. It's finding and locating advocates for yourself within your network. For people, at different stages of their life, they might need maybe different personal board of directors. For example, for somebody like me, I'm 26. The people that I am locating for my personal board of directors are of all different ages. I don't focus on a specific demographic. I think having a variation of people who are developing businesses at the young age of like 20-something versus somebody who's been maintaining a business model and maintaining the business into their 50s or 60s or 70s. I talk to people across all age groups to kind of gain a depth of advice from different generations and being able to see the variance in different industries and what have you. But another reason why personal board of directors is something that I really encourage anyone to think about is because sometimes there are things that happen in life that are not always related to business. One thing for anyone, starting a family, how to raise children, not too often in Japan have I seen people kind of reach out across their like work desk and be like, hey, I got a question for you related to raising kids. Like it's sometimes not the most comfortable place to ask those kind of questions. But if you have a personal board of directors outside of, you know, where you spend your 9 to 5 or what have you, it really allows you to reach out for help when you need it. And a lot of people find that in you know, when they really, really need someone to talk to, you kind of look around the room and you're like, there's nobody there that I can voice my like concerns or ask for advice. So some ways to develop your personal board of directors is kind of figuring out like maybe 5 different types of people that you need in your life right now. If you're starting a business, you might want to have somebody tagged as kind of your business coach. It doesn't have to be a professional business coach. It can be somebody that you respect that has developed a business similar to the one that you want to start, and they can be there for guiding you on certain steps to you know, increasing your clientele. Having somebody who, if you're on the younger end of the spectrum and maybe financially you don't have as much money as you would like at the time, having somebody to advocate for you on a financial basis, like a sponsor, is really good to have as well. A lot of companies nowadays will sponsor like an MBA or a grad program or like online certificates, but if you don't have that at your company, you're going to need that kind of person in your personal board of directors as well. And also just having people who you can talk to about things that you wouldn't want to share with your colleagues at work. And these board of directors usually are not your best friends. These are people who can give you objective advice, kind of maybe criticism in a way that you know that you're going to take it and you're not going to be, I guess, hurt about it. If it's like a personal friend, sometimes, you know, it's a little bit more difficult to have those conversations. And yeah, so you can, I guess, if you want to mix those two, but typically they would be people that you feel comfortable with being transparent talking to, but who you trust and you trust their kind of business acumen and just you jive with them on a personal level. Yeah.
All right, definitely very important. And then our last topic, which is synergize your identity. How do we do that?
So that's a very kind of big question. It takes on quite a few different meanings as well. In the context of working in Japan per se, as somebody who's not born and raised there, finding a way to bring out the best of both cultures, if you will, both business cultures, both even just daily life aspects. Finding a way to understand where people are coming from, absorb, I guess, and kind of adapt to things that you find help you grow in the culture of the place that you're living in, and also in the same vein, making sure that you're not suppressing something that you feel is really important to you. I think synergy is a really interesting word, and I'm really glad that you helped us find this when we were kind of talking about a topic. You know, a lot of people, when I was kind of like going through the old videos and stuff, a lot of people kind of talk about things like a us and them type of mentality. And that's like the one pet peeve I have about being in Japan, or having discussions with people about Japan, is creating this huge divide between, oh, this is how like a Westerner thinks, or this is how a Japanese person thinks, just kind of like discounting everything in between, as if we're living on 2 different planets and we're just trying to like communicate. That's where synergy, I feel, is the most impactful. Being able to like reach across the table and be genuinely curious. I think that's one of the biggest things that helps people blend, I don't know, cultures, opens their eyes to new things, is to just be genuinely curious about what's going on, not automatically judging people for what they're doing or judging somebody's comments, because that just like builds another wall, and it'll prevent you from, you know, blending the two cultures that you do carry with you, the place that you live in and the place that lives in you. I think being able to really be proud of the kind of person you become after living in a new place too is really important. So for people who go to Japan, I feel like a lot of times their kind of identity changes, the mindset changes, and you return to your home country like a whole new person. And how do you kind of reconcile with that? And how do you make sure, you know, you're not overstepping who you really are, and being super, super extra Japanese just because you miss like the country, but like seriously thinking about what parts of, you know, that time that you lived in that different place, accepting parts of that as who you are today, and kind of moving forward with the best of both worlds and synergizing, I guess, those life experiences to help you just grow and continue to do that wherever, you know, life takes you next.
I love it. I love it. I agree with you 100%. I have the same attitude that you have regarding, you know, the phrase us and them. Because I feel like a lot of people have that mentality. When I was living in Venezuela, that never existed. Even though Venezuela is a very diverse country. Very, very diverse. Because, you know, like when the Spanish came in, we had like the slaves, the Spanish, and the natives, they all mixed. Like, you know, like in America, they were like separate. Like now we all mixed. And that mentality never existed for me. And then when I moved to America, it's like someone put like a stamp on my head, like, boom, you're Hispanic this way. And then when I go to Japan, I see that mentality a lot, like us versus them. Is there a way to detach ourselves from the cultural scheme and empathize with people in a more spiritual level, like in a more personal level? Because I feel like it's always like, well, I'm Japanese, so blah, blah, blah. Or I'm Latino, so blah, blah, blah. Oh, but I'm white, so blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, but at the end of the day, aren't we all the same? So how is there a way to detach yourself from that cultural scheme and then just empathize with people at a human level?
Sure.
Like human to human, not like man to woman or black and white, but like human to human.
Yeah, to be honest, the first thing that comes to my mind is the word respect. Respecting that things are different in different cultures, respecting that people have different values, and not putting yourself on a pedestal when it comes to, you know, who's right or wrong, or who's, I don't know, more of a innovative thinker. Like I think that's a big topic too when it comes to like being in Japan. A lot of people are like, oh, there's no innovation in Japan. Like I don't know, that tends to lead to discussions about the educational system in Japan, and a lot of this kind of condescending tone comes out, and it comes from a lack of respect for the people. So when you kind of look at the bigger picture and you're talking about how do you empathize, like human to human, how do you really get along with and not compare the differences as much and just be kind of in the same world as other people. I think having respect, and underneath that is like not judging people for their life decisions, for their way of doing things. A lot of times a topic about like efficient working versus the length of time you're working comes up in Japan. Like how people kind of have this like large assumption that maybe the people staying super late at their desk aren't actually working. They're just trying to prove to their senpais that they're spending a lot of time, you know, in the office. I think in a way, you know, reframing the cultural differences too can allow people to learn how to respect a culture and therefore empathize with those people rather than say, wow, they're inefficient, right? Like, you know, people are just wasting time. They're not using all the like the tools, like the technology, like instead of honkoing stuff, you could use DocuSign, you know, have a lot of things be a lot faster. Even Adobe has those electronic stamps, you know. Instead of asking, why don't they do this? You know, tap into what brought people to this point and respect that it's different and it's not always the way that you like it, but you know, having some type of honest talk with yourself about where the judgment comes from, I think is really important. And I think for me too, like I came in as a super hardcore American, judging a lot of people, to be honest. Like when I first came to Japan, in my mind, it was a lot of like, why do they do things this way? And I think what I learned from that too was the privilege that I grew up with and being able to express myself without worrying about offending other people. And I didn't grow up in Japan, so I know certain people who have been in a very open setting where they can be themselves. But I also taught in a public school in Japan for 2 years where I saw how conformative the thought processes are. And like knowing that, I have so much more respect for people who find their own path, whether it's within that system or outside of it. So bilingual people in Japan who carve out their own non-traditional paths. I just look at that and I'm like, wow, that's so difficult to do in a country like Japan. And I can empathize with that, and you know, just the respect level grows. Yeah.
So you were talking about respecting the culture and all these things, but don't you feel like that respect could get in the way of innovation? So the way I see it is, I am a foreigner in Japan. Like culturally, I have nothing to do with Japan, like zero. But I live in Japan. I pay taxes here. I pay for my Nenkin, my Hoken, all those things. And I feel like, well, I guess the beauty of diversity is me bringing in some new ideas so that, you know, we could do something different and improve some things. And what I imagine is, imagine it's like the turn of the century, like the Meiji Revolution. And then Henry Ford comes to Japan and they're all using horses. And he's like, I mean, we have cars in America. Why don't y'all use cars? No, because in here we use horses. Ah, okay, sorry. I mean, does that... I mean, don't get me wrong. I love Japan. I've been here for 4 years. I want to stay here forever. And everything that I do is to help Japan innovate. I love this country. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of times, if you come and criticize or just say some constructive criticism, people will be like, shh, shh, you gotta respect, you gotta shh, shh. And I'm like, bro, but like if we could do it better, why don't we?
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying like stop doing hanko. Like if it's a cultural thing, that's perfect. But if I'm like, yo, if we could do something to help the educational system to then empower our kids for them to become entrepreneurs, artists, creative people with dreams and goals that will push Japan forward. In my opinion, I feel like criticism there is important because like a lot of the times I feel like people be like, oh, you're not this is the way that we do it. And I'm like, I mean, that's the way that you do it, but like innovation comes from criticism. It's like, yo, is not so efficient. I understand it's cultural, but how about this? Why don't we try this?
Yeah. Sorry, I think somebody's.
Yeah, I just muted the person. It's all good. So
No, what I hear you, and I think what I'm also hearing is that sometimes, sticking to the status quo and almost in a way, by respecting the culture, you're inhibiting innovation from happening, because those two can't often be said in the same sentence. So I think what I would say to that is kind of that quote, like, have a healthy disregard for XYZ. Like, I think there's a thin line between coming into Japan and just blowing up stuff, if you will, right? Like, and then there's another way to navigate the landscape that you're in, without blowing up everyone's world. And I think having that finesse is not the determinant of whether you're going to be successful in Japan per se, but having an impact on Japan in the way that you're saying. Like, you want to have a positive impact. Everything you do is for Japan. I think too, with the podcast that you're doing, even with Nightcrawlers, although it is completely from like left field, like a lot of people might not be aware of what's going on half the time because they don't know what Nightcrawlers means, and it's just so new. Like, people have to think outside the box to think, what is this group? What are they talking about? What is this perspective? Where is it coming from? But you do it in a way that is respectful of, we're not here to talk about all the negative things or the cons of like doing business in Japan. We're actually here to talk about how people are innovating, right? And like how people actually use their cultural kind of guiding, I don't know, star, like being able to see the landscape of Japan, embrace it, and like push it forward with them. And I think that's probably the best summary of how I see innovation working in Japan. Like, kind of bringing everyone together as a team leader and like carrying them with you up to the front of the cutting edge kind of world, rather than pushing people, so far to the comfort zone they don't even know what the end goal is. So innovation definitely has a home in Japan for sure. And it's gonna take, stepping over certain lines and pushing the boundaries. But with when the intention is there, like the good intentions there, I think that will result in a positive change for Japan. So I do agree with you. I think innovation is so important, but I think it can work in Japan for sure.
definitely, I agree with you too. It has to come from a place of empathy and love, and because I want to like help the country. But creativity is messy. Innovation is messy. Like you gotta be bold. You cannot be like in your little corner, like, oh, like you gotta be yourself. And one of the things, like when I was an English teacher too, is I told my students, like, guys, embrace the language, be yourself. Of course, be respectful, empathetic, respectful towards other people, but say what you gotta say. Like, do what you gotta do.
Yeah.
I mean, life is only one, yo.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important too. And it's not, I would even say this affects the like Asian community at large, like across even the Western, like Asian American or Asian Canadian, being able to break through that kind of safe zone, if you will, breaking out of your comfort zone and doing things that regardless of what other people tell you, just sticking to your guns and just going out and doing the thing that you think is going to make you, one, happy but successful, and be a fulfilling, in this case, like career. I feel like it's even beyond Japan. Like I see that in so many other spaces. And I see that in my own community, and I saw that in myself. And so this transformation of kind of being bold and innovating is something I'm going through at this very moment. And I cannot tell you how liberating it is to, one, believe in yourself, to assume a career that you create for yourself, and to help people and do, like, through that process, like in doing what you do and doing what you love, you're actually helping people. And I don't know that that's a very common mindset in certain cultures. And so it's an awesome, I love what you're doing with this podcast. I think it brings out a lot of really great discussions that I never had in Japan, to be honest. Like I had some talks about identity, being like third culture kid or kikoku shijo, like having all these different societal pressures. But at the end of the day, you have full authority to run your life the way you want to run it. And definitely, I hope that people, if they take away anything from this talk, is to just be unapologetically yourself and trust yourself in the process, and you will succeed. Yeah.
I love it. Awesome, Christy. Before I ask you the last question, and before we go to the Q&A session, guys, I'm going to ask Christy a real quick question. While I ask her the question, please think about your question. If you have a question, type it on the chat, and you can ask her directly. Christy, my last question to you is, what is the change you would like to see in the world?
Okay. Oh, that's a big question. I hope that in the next, generation that comes, I see so much shifting happening right now. Just, in business and what a normal life path looks like. And especially during this time period where we're all kind of up against our very honest priorities. I think, with the pandemic having started and people starting to question a lot of things, a lot of the processes, a lot of the companies they're in, a lot of the jobs they're in, a lot of the positions they're in on boards. What I hope to see in the next, years to come, I think, are genuine attempts at self-fulfillment and discovery. I think a lot of times in society, we try to please other people. We try to be who other people want us to be, for the likes, for the attention, for the popularity. And I don't know, I feel that a lot in America. But I think shifting that dialogue from how do we get attention to how do we push our own narratives, and how do we live a fulfilling life, not for other people, but for ourselves. So I'm hoping that, people who have the time, people who have the time, I hope that they really do take these moments where maybe they're working from home, or maybe they were given this really great gift in disguise of being laid off. I think a lot of people, when big changes happen in life, it's really devastating. It's like, oh my God, I had all these plans and all of a sudden they just got chopped off and stopped. And it feels very disorienting and you're really uncertain about the future. But in fact, that is a huge gift, to be able to just sit with who you are at this point in time and look back on all you've done and ask yourself, where do you want to go next? And I don't think we have that freedom to think about what we want when we're in a job, or when we're head knee deep in a really big project. It's all about, you know, doing your duty and filling the role for somebody else's company to succeed. And I don't know, I hope that people try to live life for themselves a little bit more. That was a long answer.
No, it was beautiful. Thank you, Christy. We have a question. We're entering our Q&A session now. Seema, go ahead.
Hi, Christy again. So what was your biggest regret or your greatest learning moment when you were in Japan, and what would you have done differently?
That's a good question. Let's see here. What was your biggest regret learning moment when you were in Japan? What would I have done differently? How should I answer that? I guess I'll start by saying I tried to live my life without having regrets. I think if anyone regrets something that they've done in their life, it reflects a lot of self-doubt. It just shows that at that time, maybe we didn't fulfill the shoes of the person that we thought we were, of who we thought we were. With that said, my biggest kind of learning moment was recently in April 2020, when I was let go from my company during the state of emergency in Tokyo. I never saw it as a positive thing. I don't know, maybe at the time most people don't think a layoff is positive, so maybe that was like the natural reaction. But that moment was a huge teachable moment for me on so many levels. I learned that you are your own person next to your company. You're not your company, right? You don't assume the company identity, but I think a lot of times, like when people have that do what you love kind of work culture, it's hard to separate yourself from the company. And I really enjoyed my job. I enjoyed the people. It was a really good environment. And so I felt like a piece of me kind of was kind of cut off. And that was really hard. So I learned to separate who I was from my company. I also learned that nothing is permanent. I think sometimes we become comfortable at a certain point in our careers or maybe relationships and things like that. But you never really think about, what if that just goes away? Kind of like when somebody, passes away, or if you just suddenly have to uproot from a country and go back, like in the case of the pandemic, because maybe borders are closing, things like that. Knowing that nothing is permanent allows you to think, how to see opportunity in things that don't go the way that they were planned. And so looking back on that teachable moment that I had, being laid off by my company, I wish I had stayed in Japan. I think had I had this frame of mind when I was in Tokyo, had I come to the conclusion that I can do what I want to do and help people and make money, had I, been a little bit more confident in myself, I think I would have stayed in Japan and continued to work that path. However, part of me also thinks if I didn't have this chance to come back to the States, link up with all these people back stateside, learn that this is a profitable market to be in, like web design and career coaching, because it's a really big thing in the States, and I didn't see it that much in Japan. It's actually been the biggest blessing in disguise, because I realized that there's a market for this, and now I'm really, really excited to develop it and grow it here, and also in Japan, where it's not so relevant. The coaching stuff and website design, I don't know if you live in Japan, you see all the websites there. They're not the most aesthetically pleasing or easy to use. So in a way, and I always feel this way looking back on things, like everything happens for a reason. When that answer comes, could come like 5 years later, you never know. But yeah, I guess I could have stayed in Japan, but I'm not. So I'm doing what I can to, I think, still play my role both in Japan and the US. So thank you so much for your question. That was really introspective for me.
All right, awesome. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in. Sorry.
Go ahead.
But first, thank you both for hosting this event. For Christy, I want to go back to the topic about synergizing your identity. And have you noticed, or is there a track record of like key traits of people who you think have been successful at synergizing their energy or identities, particularly among, I don't know, in Japan, who are not Japanese or don't completely identify as Japanese?
That's a good question. There's one example that pops into mind. Another thing that I kind of learned through ACCJ, if any of you are members or want to be members, it's actually like a really great organization. They have a lot of cool events. But through that organization, I met his last name, I think is Greg Story. Greg Story is the GM of Dale Carnegie in Japan. And he talks about sales and doing sales in Japan and how different it is from sales in America. And he talked about, the struggle that he had coming into Japan, trying to do everything the American way, talk to people, ask them their needs, serve them up with services and good sales solutions. And that always led to a failed sale gig. Like he never was able to close a deal until he started to learn the Japanese way of sales. And he dove into the process, and he wrote a book about it. And I just, seeing how somebody could come into a different country with a different culture, different language, learn the language, tap into what works in the culture, like business-wise, how people do sales, and then be super successful in that market because they kind of localize their own mindset while still having individuality. That was one of the most impressive, I guess, if you will, persons that I had met who truly internalized the Japanese sales process, but was still authentically himself and very successful business-wise. So the Dale Carnegie group is pretty cool in Japan too. If you want to check out their programs, they have some business programs too. Yeah, thanks for the question, Kelly.
All right, do we have anyone else? Last question. Anyone else? All right, so let's wrap up for today. Christy, it was an honor having you tonight. Thanks so much for coming into the show and sharing your awesome perspective, experience, and all these awesome information. Oh, hold up, by the way, where can people reach you?
Oh, this QR code, if you scan it, it'll bring you to my Linktree account, and you can see the website for website development, and then there's another website for coaching. So let's see. I can share that with you. This is if If you scan this QR code, or the link is right here in the chat, you can go there and you'll find all the different ways to contact me, or you can find me on LinkedIn. And I check those daily, so feel free to message me any questions, or if you wanted to just get in touch.
I also added your website to the chat.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, guys, so thank you so much for coming. It was an honor having you today. I'm super grateful. Christy, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Angel. This was really awesome. And thank you everyone for your questions. I kind of have so many questions to ask everyone else. So hopefully if you do reach out to me, I'd love to continue the conversation about your own journeys in Japan, or, you know, in Japan then having gone back to your home country. Just please feel free to reach out anytime. And I'm here if you want to also make a new website for yourself, a personal brand, and also if you want to tap into some career coaching programs. And you can find those all at the link tree as well. So thank you so much.
All right, guys, we're finished for today. Peace out. Have a good day.
Bye-bye. Thank you.